it's Lynn, and in today's video, I want to spend some time with another Taylor Swift track that doesn't get nearly as much conversation as it deserves. Peter from the Tortured Poets Department, the Anthology. And honestly, Peter is my personal favorite song from the album, so I'd love to dissect it with you today. One quick note before we start, you'll have heard this from me before. If you caught my first Taylor Swift song dissection, which I will link down below, my interest here in this discussion isn't in identifying who the song is about. That particular guessing game has been all too played out. What I want to examine instead is the song itself, its construction, imagery, architecture, because that's where the substance actually lives. So without further ado, let's start. Peter is a quieter, less commercial piece than a lot of her more discussed work, which I think is exactly why it rewards a closer look. Underneath its gentle, folk-leaning surface, there's a genuinely sophisticated piece of literary borrowing at work, and I want to walk through it the way the song actually unfolds, section by section, just to see how that borrowing is built. The song's governing literary source is J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, and Swift's narrator situates herself explicitly as Wendy Darling, addressing an absent, unchanging Peter directly across the entire piece. That framing establishes the song's central device before a single specific image appears. The entire piece is constructed as a sustained apostrophe, a rhetorical mode in which a speaker addresses someone absent, someone who cannot answer back. Every line is technically spoken to Peter, not about him, which gives the whole piece the quality of an unsent letter, or perhaps something closer to an elegy for a person who is notably still alive. The opening section establishes that apostrophe immediately and pairs it with a quiet act of comparison. The narrator addresses Peter directly, noting that she's heard he's doing well, and then almost in the same breath observes that life has simply been easier for him than it had been for her. This is a fairly efficient piece of characterization. Within just a couple of lines, we understand that Peter has remained charmed and untouched by consequence, while the narrator has been left to carry the weight he never had to. The comparison isn't bitter exactly. It's close to weary. And that tone, weary rather than furious, sets the emotional register for everything that follows. From there, the song moves into a passage built around promises made in youth, invoking the phrase, words from the mouths of babes, a line with roots in scripture traditionally used to suggest that wisdom or truth can emerge from the least expected, least authoritative sources. Here, it's repurposed with some irony. The promises Peter made were sincere, perhaps, but sincerity from someone incapable of follow-through is not the same as trustworthiness. The line does double duty, gesturing toward innocence and toward its limitations simultaneously, and it sets up the song's central complaint, that a promise made by a child doesn't obligate the adult that child eventually failed to become. The next section turns toward memory itself, with the narrator recalling their history as something preserved in closets like cedar, cedar being the wood traditionally used to line storage chests specifically because it protects fabric from decay. This image functions as a controlling metaphor for the entire song. Memory, treated as something deliberately preserved against time's erosion, even as the person those memories belong to has failed to preserve anything else about the relationship. It's a small domestic image, but it carries a lot of structural weight because it's the first moment the song suggests that preservation and stagnation might be the same thing wearing different names. The section that follows returns to the central promise at the heart of the song, that Peter said he would grow up and would then come find her. Swift repeats this promise more than once across the track, and that repetition functions less as simple restatement than as evidence of the narrator's own disbelief, circling back to the same broken sentence, the way a person circles back to a memory they can't quite finish processing. This is also where the extended metaphor of arrested childhood versus inevitable adulthood becomes most explicit. Peter exists permanently outside of time, still the same age he always was, while the narrator is the one who has to keep moving forward, aging, accumulating responsibility, whether she wants to or not. As the song progresses, it introduces the idea of the Lost Boys chapter, borrowing directly from Barrie's cast of boys who resist growing up and remain in a state of perpetual childhood. By framing that period as a chapter, the narrator treats it as a closed phase of Peter's life rather than an ongoing partnership, which is a subtle but important shift in tense. She's no longer describing a relationship in progress, but reading it retrospectively, the way you'd read, perhaps, a finished book. The section functioning as the song's emotional turn arrives with a burst of direct interrogation. The narrator asking whether she was lying when she said that she was trying, and noticing, almost physically, that some part of her already suspects the answer. This is where the song's questioning intensifies and compounds. She asks whether he's still a mind reader, still capable of stealing every scene he enters, still the same magnetic presence that she remembers. These aren't rhetorical flourishes. They function as the song's central engine of doubt. The narrator is left interrogating a memory rather than a present, living relationship, which is itself part of the song's emotional argument. You cannot actually negotiate with someone who has ultimately declined to occupy the same timeline as you. In its closing movement, the song shifts into something closer to plain address, asking for forgiveness and insisting that she tried, no longer speaking in fairy tale vocabulary, but in the flattest, least ornamented language the song uses anywhere. And that shift matters. The mythic scaffolding has done its work of explaining the situation. Now the narrator drops it entirely to say the unmagical, unadorned thing directly to him. The song's final image returns to the light left burning at a window, which draws directly from the original Peter Pan narrative, in which Wendy's mother famously leaves the nursery window open, waiting. Swift relocates that waiting onto the narrator herself, and in the song's very last lines, the light gets extinguished. There is no reunion, no reversal of fortune, no last-minute return. The extinguishing functions as the narrator's final act of agency in the story, not something done to her, but something that she finally chooses to do herself. It reads less as defeat than as release, the narrator allowing herself to stop waiting, which is its own quiet, hard-won form of maturity, even if it isn't the outcome that she once hoped for. Taken section by section, the song's power comes from how patiently it earns that final image. It isn't a song about villainizing someone who couldn't grow up. It's a song about the specific grief of loving someone whose stasis becomes, however unintentionally, a burden placed on the person who loved them. That's a particular kind of heartbreak, not betrayal, not cruelty, but simply someone's fundamental unwillingness, or dare I say inability, to meet you where you've had no choice but to arrive. And I think that's exactly why so many listeners, including myself, connect to the song, even though it's tucked away on the deluxe half of the album rather than positioned as a lead single. The premise doesn't require anyone to have read Barrie's novel or seen a stage production to feel its weight. Almost everyone has, at some point, loved a person who stayed exactly where they were while circumstance required everyone else to keep moving, including you. The Peter Pan framework simply gives that very common, very adult disappointment a shape precise enough to be sung. Structurally, it's also worth noting that this entire progression unfolds without conventional pop chorus. There's no discrete hook that separates itself cleanly from the verses. Instead, the song accumulates through repetition and variation, closer in form to a folk ballad or a sustained incantation than to a three-act pop structure. That formal choice mirrors its content rather elegantly. A song about someone caught outside the ordinary passage of time is itself built without the usual verse, chorus, verse markers of musical time. The form enacts the theme section by section, all the way to that final image of the light going out. I think what makes Peter worth this level of attention is how willing it is to sit in disappointment rather than resolve it. A song that trusts its listeners to find meaning in an ending that doesn't actually end anything. I'm curious whether you read that ending as release or as a defeat. So let me know down in the comment section below. I would love to interact with you all about my favorite song from the Tortured Poets album, Peter. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You are awesome, stay awesome, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!